from me. And now we move to our second panel and our final question for the afternoon. And I think everybody who's hanging in with us deserves a drink in a little while. We've got half an hour to go. Thank you. I don't think we've lost too many numbers, so that's good. The fourth question then is, how can the balance between professional learning and qualifications be managed? For example, professional learning, university micro-credentialing, and other university offerings. And we have three people here, Renee, Russell, and Toni. So you can have 5 minutes each, starting with Renee. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Judy. For people who don't know me, I'm the director of the micro-credential unit at the University of Southern Queensland. So that's my bent. That's why I'll be talking a little bit about micro-credentials in this little piece. To start with, I just want to say that it is not a clear space. So if you're out there thinking, not quite sure what micro-credentials are all about, you're probably in the same space as a lot of other people and a lot of universities and professional organisations as well. So I do have an article that I just put up in the conversation last week, which I'll share in the chat, rather than a shameless self-promotion, just as it encaptures all the latest bits and pieces that are happening in the space, because we've had Universities of Australia guidance, we've had a UNESCO report looking at common language. There's a micro-credential marketplace coming soon, which will help bring all sorts of things together and make things easier to find. So there's actually a whole lot of movement in the space. What I've really enjoyed hearing about so far today or this afternoon in this session is the way in which there are so many different pathways and so much support through associations and through other areas. And there's lots of different ways that teaching out of field can potentially tap into many different things. And what I really think we're looking for here is like a credential ecosystem, an ecology of credentials. So how do we make all of these different things work together? You can probably tell in my choice of language there, I'm a former science teacher myself. And I really think some of the really good points that have been made so far, and one I picked up in the Mentimeter was time, and money, money, money. And I think micro-credentials can play a role in that because they are shorter pieces of learning. A lot of the micro-credentials we're running now are about 6 weeks, or about 40 hours of learning all up. Some of them are bigger than that, some of them are smaller than that. They can be then for credit into the grad cert. So I guess that's the obvious pathway with micro-credentialing. You can stack them for credit into a grad cert to give teachers who are teaching out of field their in-field qualifications. But I think there's a lot more to it than that. I think there's a lot more possibilities. We've talked about all the different types of professional learning that's out there for teachers. And we're really looking at how can we bring all of that in and give teachers the benefit of that through an RPL process into those grad cert masters programs as well. So that has both the time and the money imperative tied up into it, because at the moment, for us at least, we're not charging for RPL. So if a teacher could get some credit for the teaching out of field that they've already done, or for the professional learning that they've already done, and bring that in to a program, they're going to save themselves time and money. So I think the other point I'd really like to touch on is the work with professional associations. So I think that's an excellent point, that universities need to be working more closely with professional associations and with the school systems themselves to make sure what we're crafting is fit for purpose and suits the needs, because we know teachers are really busy people. That's just a given. So we need to be working in ways that help teachers achieve what they need to be able to be seen as in field or work towards being in field in ways that work for them and that are industry connected. So one of the core ideas of micro-credentialing for me is around industry connection wherever it's being done. So it doesn't matter whether that's in business or engineering or what field that's in. We should be looking towards that industry connection. So we're doing a little bit of work at the moment. It's not really, it's more teaching out of field for context than teaching out of field for subject, but we're doing a little bit of work with the Queensland Association of Special Education Leaders, because they're very interested in how do we skill teachers to be able to teach in particularly special education environments like units and special education schools, so that more high level needs stuff. So we're working with them around some micro-credentialing in that space. And I think that that's a really great way for us to make sure what we're providing meets the need, but for also for the association to have a voice in what's out there and what's being provided. I must just about be out of time, Judy, am I?
No, oh, yes, you're close. If you've got one more thing, that's fine.
I really do like the idea too of, as part of the ecology of a credential pathway, and this is something I've picked up from the discussion as well, and also from the Mentimeter, there was mention there of communities of practice. So we might have an RPL pathway that teams with some micro-credentials into a grad cert. How can we wrap a community of practice around that as well? And that may be where, you know, an association, or, you know, if you've got a regional group or something like that. We actually have some really great models with that. In the one that sprung into my mind was women in leadership in rural areas. So there's some really great ways of putting those things together so that people have the support as well as the credentialing piece to go with.
Thanks, Renee. And over to Russell.
Sorry, I had to remember to turn my microphone on. Thanks, Judy. I think what I'm going to talk about is based on the graduate certificate of secondary maths and the graduate certificate of secondary science at Deakin. And I think I don't particularly want to editorialise on graduate certificates, but I think what we've learned over the last year is quite a bit about the needs and circumstances of out-of-field teachers that I'll share with you. I wanted to make a couple of points in relation to some of the general points that have been made. I think it's clear that, I mean, teachers, if they stay in the profession for their working lives, I mean, that's a long time to be defined by an initial subject area interest. And so it strikes me as very reasonable that teachers, you know, through even just wanting variety, might choose to teach out of field or enjoy teaching out of field when they're really asked to do so. So that's one thing, we need to accommodate that. And I think the idea of out of field teachers catering for their professional learning has to be, as we've said many times, has to be bound up with teacher growth and teacher professional learning generally. I think we need to have a much broader commitment to an understanding about the learning needs of teachers overall. I think too, when you think about accreditation, a teacher that's in field has, what, 3 years, 2 years of subject specialism behind them. And so if we're really serious about that, we've got to think about bringing out of field teachers at least somewhat in alignment with that kind of commitment to discipline and to subject. So it can't be done by just simply short-term fixes on how you teach a particular activity. I think it has to do with induction into subject cultures, into the aesthetics of subjects, into commitments about ways of learning and so on. So I think we're talking about, you know, a substantial body of knowledge there. And so I guess that's, let's explore the implications of that for professional learning. With the grad cert that we're running, it is as Penny described. I mean, it's a 1 year, four subjects, with a lot of support for schools for time release for these teachers. And what we've found is, and we we had a requirement, although it was a little bit loose as it turned out, to that they be teaching out of field at the time and have a history of it. Some of them, in fact, came in without ever having taught the maths or the science, and that created difficulties for us, because there's something to be said about learning just by having grappled with it. I think if you're teaching out of field, you learn a lot, even if you haven't done a course in it, and you understand the difficulties. One of the things that occupied us and teachers, as it turned out, is just what do you foreground in this professional learning or in this graduate certificate? And we chose to do it very much through a PCK lens, teaching content through student understanding. But we had some challenges with some teachers who had expected that they were going to come in and find a series of lectures on the content, so they could just take the content and then they'd know how to teach it. So I think there was an expectation from some of those people that that in fact teaching was a matter of delivery of something you knew. So we had to, I think over the year, we've managed, in fact, we've had some very good comments from people over the year. We had some trouble early on in terms of getting them to think about what was really important about the culture of teaching science or teaching maths. The other tension we had to deal with is related to the fact that when you talk about teaching a subject and the disciplinary subject cultures, that's a moving feast. And as we know, curricula change all the time. And so you've got, for instance, the general capabilities now. You've got critical and creative thinking. I think traditions in schools don't always acknowledge those. And so in a way, as university academics teaching these, do we teach what is everyday practice? You know, how to run a prac, how to kind of perhaps deliver a content in a straightforward way, or are we after something deeper? And we had to really work with our teachers to get them to recognise that there were principles in the subject that didn't necessarily match with everyday practice in the subject in the school they're dealing with, and so there were some tensions there as well. There are also challenges with returning to study. We have a special set of supports for these graduate certificate students, if you like, or teachers, in terms of getting them to learn how to deal with literature, evidence-based practice, and so on. And so we had supports in place there. So there were multiple challenges. There were challenges with timetables. So the school having funding was great, and often principals use that strategically. But as a couple of people asked in the chat earlier today, timetables are terrible constraints on attending intensives, but by advertising these ahead of time, and schools knew exactly where they were going, and for next year's course we've already advertised all the time so that schools have plenty of time to plan for that. And so there are a lot of just mechanical difficulties or challenges, I think, for that. And I think the final point I should make is, and I realised I'm just a minute over time, sorry, Judy. Just a final point was really trying to encourage those conversations within school over the years, to talk to teachers back in their schools about it. And often these teachers hadn't done that. They were sort of, elsewhere, I suppose, and so trying to get an alignment there, and that's consistent with the best principles of professional learning.
Yeah.
So yeah, a complicated matter, area to be in, I think.
Thanks, Russell. And we're going to go to Toni now. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. I think overall more questions have been raised in this session than answered from what I've been hearing. But, you know, the question of how to balance between professional learning and qualifications is challenging, and I don't think there's one clear or simple answer. I think we need to have a blend of both, but I do think that an area of particular interest to watch is around that micro-credentials area. And I think that this might help with the issues of teachers both teaching out of field, but also to help fill those missing spaces in the teaching degrees that so many people have spoken about today. That, you know, we only have 4 years for a Bachelor of Education or 2 years for a Master's in teaching. And there's a lot to cover in that time frame. My current role, I'm working for the Computer Science Education Research, or CSER team with Adelaide University. And we've been developing MOOCS, which are online courses, and delivering professional learning currently as part of the Maths in Schools project, which follows on from the Digital Technologies project that CSER had been delivering for the past 5 years. And what we found through that time is that the MOOCs have been very popular with teachers because it allows for flexibility, they're self-paced learning, and they're either low cost or no cost to the schools. You know, schools are amazed when they find that where they can have somebody come out and run professional learning for free for their teachers. And in terms of teaching out of field, in looking at the digital technologies area, many teachers that are teaching digital technologies didn't learn this content at university. It has been introduced in the last, in the current, some current universities are delivering it in their courses. But, the majority of teachers out there are essentially classed as out-of-field teachers, both in primary and secondary schools. And I think that a key point that teaching out of field or a need for subject-specific knowledge is something that teachers in primary school are facing as well. It's not just a secondary school issue. And both the digital technologies and maths MOOC projects have been government funded, so the need for upskilling teachers has been acknowledged higher, by the government. And so there is an area that this is an area of focus. But I think that underpinning all of these issues of professional learning, whether it's micro-credentials or professional learning or delivered by associations, is that it's essential that teachers continue to take responsibility for their continued learning. And my question is, how do we do that? How do we inspire teachers that are already time poor and schools are not supporting them because there's not the budget and money there? So how do we inspire teachers to be those lifelong learners that we are as teachers want our students to have? How do we turn that around as well and inspire our colleagues to be, to seek their own professional learning and their own ongoing kind of upskilling themselves? And there's abundance of professional learning available, but often numbers are low in attendance. And so I think that becomes an issue as well. And I do love that one of the good things that's come out of the pandemic, somebody mentioned it before in the chat, is the way that technology has brought us together. And I'm hoping that will continue, that, we can attend professional learning in another state from our desk at home. I used to travel so much with the CSER team that we would travel all over the place. I'd be on a plane every second day. And, it's now wonderful that I can support teachers and still be home, home here. And my commute from my bedroom to my office is quite short. I think one of the other issues is that to find that balance, that currently different states and territories have different requirements for their teacher registrations, the hours for accreditation. And so another thing that you were talking about, bringing people together and working in partnerships, is a national approach could help professional learning providers to go through that accreditation process just once. I know I'm in the ACT, and if we deliver professional learning, we have teachers come in from New South Wales. And so to go through the process for ACT registration as well as NESA registration, it's a lot of time and effort to put that paperwork in. And so if we could have some kind of a national approach to that as well, I think that would help teachers attend the professional learning because they know they're getting their accredited hours, as well as the providers to get it out there. And I think that then comes back to, somebody was mentioning before about how do you ensure your quality, the quality assurance of your professional learning. And so I think the MOOCs help with that they're delivered from a platform within the university, and micro-credentials are also addressing that issue as well, that it is quality. It's not somebody just, you know, coming up and starting a company and running professional learning that I've come across in my time as a teacher. So I think I think I don't think we've answered anything, but I think there's been lots of points raised that will continue the discussion going. You know, coming in as the last speaker, most things have already been said, and I could just say yes to everything that people have already brought up. I think it's been a great discussion, and so many points that have been raised that put a lot of food for thought out there for me to take away as well.
Thank you, Toni.